She drove the nail in with her bare fist because she had lost the hammer somewhere in the wreckage of everything she'd been promised. Her knuckles bled. She didn't stop. The board was crooked. The roof was half gone. The wind came through the walls like the whole Wyoming frontier was laughing at her. But Abigail Carter did not cry. She picked up another board. If you're new here, subscribe, stay until the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Abigail Carter knew it was bad before she even broke the seal, because good news never came. In envelopes that thin, and men who meant what they promised never wrote in handwriting that rushed. She read it twice, standing in the middle of the Missouri post office, with Mrs. Hensley watching from behind the counter and pretending to sort letters she had already sorted 3 times that morning. Dear Miss Carter, after considerable reflection, I have decided to pursue a different arrangement. I wish you well in your future endeavors. Mr. Thomas Aldridge, Laramie, Wyoming. That was all. No explanation, no apology, no return fare. Abigail folded the letter in half, then in half again, and pressed it flat against her palm until the paper was warm from her skin. Bad news, dear, Mrs. Hensley called out. No, ma'am, Abigail said. Just correspondence. She walked out of the post office and stood on the wooden sidewalk of Millbrook, Missouri, and looked at the street she had grown up on. The dry goods store where her father used to buy tobacco. The church where she had sung in the choir until the reverend's wife suggested gently that she might be more comfortable helping with the kitchen ministry instead. The schoolhouse where she had finished at the top of her class and received a handshake instead of the scholarship that went to a boy with lower marks and a father who sat on the board of trustees. She was 25 years old. She had sold everything she owned to pay the agency fee. She had written Thomas Aldridge 14 letters over 4 months, and he had written back 11. And in those 11 letters, he had told her he was looking for a capable woman, an intelligent woman, a woman who wasn't afraid of hard work and wide open spaces. He had never asked her size. She had never volunteered it. The agency photograph had shown her face, her genuinely lovely face with the soft brown eyes her father used to say, looked like polished river stones, and the long chestnut hair she pinned back every morning, because loose hair wasn't practical, and the photograph had ended at her shoulders. She understood now what Thomas Aldridge's letter meant. She understood that someone had told him. Her cousin Dorothea, probably. Dorothea, who had helpfully mentioned to the agency representative that Abigail was a large girl. Dorothea, who had said at the funeral reception for Abigail's father 3 months ago, with genuine sympathy, coating every word like sugar on a poison pill. Oh, sweetheart, who is ever going to want all of you? Abigail had already purchased the train ticket west. She stood on that sidewalk for exactly 4 minutes. Then she walked to the station. Take. She arrived in Laramie, Wyoming on a Thursday afternoon in June of 1884 with a leather satchel, a small wooden trunk, $22.30, and absolutely nowhere to go. The station agent looked at her ticket, looked at her, and looked at her ticket again. You the Carter woman, the mail-order bride for Tom Aldridge. I was, she said. He sent word you wasn't coming. He was mistaken. The station agent scratched the back of his neck. Well, miss, I don't rightly know what to tell you. Mr. Aldridge moved his whole operation up to Cheyenne about 2 weeks ago. Married a widow woman up there. Respectable match, people said. Abigail kept her face very still. Is there a boarding house in town? She asked. There's the Caldwell place on 2nd Street. But Miss Caldwell runs a tight operation. Proper references, good standing, that sort of thing. I have a letter of introduction from my church in Missouri. He looked at her again. That particular look, quick assessing, apologetic, dismissive, the look she had learned to identify before she was 12 years old. The look that said you don't quite fit, and the person giving it felt sorry about that, but not sorry enough to do anything differently. I'll try the boarding house, she said. Thank you for your assistance. Miss Caldwell was a narrow woman in her 50s, with the sharp eyes of someone who had been disappointed by humanity often enough to develop a very precise calibration for disappointment. She looked at Abigail on her front porch for a long assessing moment. Full board is $4 a week, she said. References advance payment, and I don't allow male visitors' spirits or livestock inside the house. I have no male visitors, I don't drink, and my horse is at the livery, Abigail said. She didn't mention that the horse was rented and would need to be returned by Friday. Miss Caldwell looked at her for another moment. I've only got the small room. How small? Small. I'll take it. Miss Caldwell held out her hand for payment. Abigail paid her $8 2 weeks and followed her inside. The room was in fact very small. She lasted 11 days at the Caldwell boarding house. The room held the heat like a Dutch oven, and she could hear every conversation through the walls, which meant every other boarder could hear hers, which meant that by the end of the first week, every person at the supper table knew exactly why she had come to Laramie and exactly what Thomas Aldridge had done. The sympathy was worse than the cruelty. Mr. Patterson, the traveling dry goods salesman, who took his meals at the far end of the table, said, "It's a shame, miss, a real shame. A girl like you deserves better than that." A girl like you. She knew what that meant. It meant a girl with your particular disadvantage. A girl working so far uphill. A girl who should be grateful for any attention at all, and doubly grateful for human decency, and triply grateful for whatever scraps of ordinary life she could gather before someone noticed she didn't deserve them. "Thank you," she said, and passed the breadbasket. On day 11, Miss Caldwell knocked on her door. "I need the room," she said. "I have a family coming through, they need the space. I'm very sorry." The family never arrived. Abigail watched from the street as she loaded her trunk onto a rented cart and saw no family, no luggage, no sign of anyone incoming. Just Miss Caldwell standing in her doorway, watching Abigail leave with the particular expression of a woman who had decided the math simply didn't work out in Abigail's favor. Abigail drove the cart to the edge of town before she let herself feel it. Then she drove 3 more miles because the edge of town wasn't far enough. She had heard about the Collins place from the livery owner's wife, who was a talker and therefore an inadvertent source of useful information. The Collins property was 3 miles east of Laramie proper, abandoned since old Silas Collins died of a fever. 2 winters back, and his children back east had decided the land wasn't worth the trouble of selling and simply left everything as it stood. The house was there. The well was there. The land was fallow, but it was there. It wasn't legally hers, but it wasn't legally anyone else's at the moment either. She drove the cart out to the property on a Thursday afternoon and looked at the house for a long time before she climbed down. It was bad. The roof had a hole big enough to see sky through. 2 of the porch boards had rotted clean through. 1 shutter hung by a single hinge. The front door would not close all the way because the frame had shifted, and when she pushed it open, it gave a sound like something wounded. She walked through every room. Kitchen, parlor, bedroom, small back room that might have been storage or might have been a nursery. Old furniture covered in dust. A cook stove with a cracked firebox. A pump that she worked until her arms ached before it coughed up water that ran brown, then rust-colored, then grudgingly clean. She stood in the middle of the kitchen with her hands wet and her dress dusty, and she thought about Missouri. She thought about Dorothea's voice. "Who is ever going to want all of you?" She thought about Thomas Aldridge's thin letter. She thought about Miss Caldwell's porch. She thought about the look. The particular, familiar, apologetic, not really look. Then she walked out to the wagon, untied the trunk, and carried it inside. It took her 4 trips, and she had to put it down twice on the porch because the weight combined with the heat was considerable, but she got it through the door. She didn't need anyone to carry it for her. She just needed to stop and breathe. The first thing she fixed was the well pump because water was not optional. She had watched her father repair the pump at their farm in Missouri twice, and she had paid attention both times because Abigail Carter had learned very young that paying attention was a survival skill. She took the pump head apart on the kitchen floor, cleaned the leather cup valve with a rag and some of the lamp oil she had in her satchel, and reassembled it slowly and methodically. When she worked the handle again, the water came up gray, then clear. She sat down on the kitchen floor and put her face in her hands for about 30 seconds. Then she stood up and started on the roof. She found lumber in the barn, old boards, some warped, some good enough to work with. She found a hammer. No nails, but she knew the hardware store in Laramie would give her credit if she asked right, and she had 2 weeks before her money ran out, which meant she had 2 weeks to figure out how not to run out. She drove back to town, bought nails, flour, salt, pork, dried beans, a small bag of cornmeal, and matches. She drove back out to the Collins place. She started on the porch boards because the roof required a ladder, and she needed to build confidence before she attempted height. The work was hard, in the way that honest work is always hard. Not cruel, just demanding, asking everything you had, and not apologizing for it. Her hands blistered, and then the blisters broke, and then her hands toughened. Her back ached every evening. She learned how to drive a nail in 2 strikes instead of 6. She was on her 4th day of work, balanced on a section of porch railing, trying to reach a high board that needed replacing when she heard a horse. She didn't look up immediately. Horses passed on the road sometimes. She had learned not to pay attention to horses on the road, because paying attention meant stopping work, and stopping work meant losing daylight. "Miss." She looked up then. The man sitting the horse was tall enough that even mounted, he had a kind of particular vertical authority, like a lodgepole pine that had decided to be a person. He had dark brown hair under a weathered hat, a short beard that was several days past, deliberate, and several days shy of unkempt, and the kind of face that weather makes, not old, not young, just permanent. Weathered and particular, and not given to change. He was looking at the board she was trying to reach. "That section there is load-bearing," he said. "You pull it wrong, the whole north corner comes down on you." Abigail looked at the board, looked at him. "And how would you suggest I pull it right?" she asked. Something shifted in his expression. Not amusement exactly, more like recalibration. "You'd want to shore up the corner post first," he said. "Put temporary support under the header before you touch the board itself." "Where would I find temporary support material?" "Your barn. There's an old fence rail against the east wall. 8 feet split pine. That would do it." She looked at him for another moment. "Thank you," she said, and climbed down from the railing. She heard the horse shift behind her. "You're the woman staying in the Collins place," he said. "I'm staying here, yes." "Collins' land isn't deeded." "No," she said. "It isn't. Collins' children back east aren't interested in it." So I understood. She pulled the barn door open and found the fence rail exactly where he had said it would be. 8 feet split pine still solid. She dragged it out and positioned it under the porch header, angling it carefully until she felt the weight transfer. The man on the horse watched without speaking. When she climbed back up and tested the load-bearing board, it came free cleanly. She looked at him. He tipped his hat. "Nathan Walker," he said. "My ranch is about a mile east." "Abigail Carter," she said. "This is my house." He looked at the house. At the porch she had half rebuilt. At the roof with its new boards bright against the weathered old ones. At the window she had rehung the shutter on. "I see that," he said. He turned his horse and rode east. He came back the next morning. She was on the roof. She had found a way up using a section of fence post leaned against the side wall. Not elegant, but functional when she heard the horse again. She stayed where she was and kept working. If he had something to say, he would say it. "You're going to fall," he said. "I haven't yet." "That's a poor standard for structural safety." She drove a nail. "Did you need something, Mr. Walker?" A pause. "I came to offer you work," he said. She stopped, set down the hammer, looked at him from the roof. "What kind of work?" "My cook left last month. I've got 11 men to feed 3 times a day, and I'm doing it myself, which is not a situation anyone is happy about. I need a cook. I need someone to manage the supply ledger. I can offer room and board and $12 a month." Abigail looked at him for a long moment. "I'm not leaving this house," she said. "I didn't ask you to live at the ranch. You'd come mornings and evenings for meals. The ledger work you can do here." "Why me?" The question came out flat and direct, which was how she had learned to ask the questions that actually mattered. He didn't flinch from it. "You fixed the well pump," he said. "I could see it from the road. And you rehung that shutter level on a frame that's 3 degrees off plumb. Either you know what you're doing, or you're exceptionally lucky, and I don't have patience for luck." She thought about her $22 now down to $9 and some cents. She thought about the roof that still needed 3 more sections replaced. She thought about Dorothea, about Miss Caldwell, about Thomas Aldridge. She thought about the look. "I have conditions," she said. "Tell me. I work my hours and I come home to my house every night. You don't discuss my personal situation with your men or anyone in town, and you pay me on the first of each month, not at your convenience." Nathan Walker looked up at her on the roof. "Those are reasonable conditions," he said. "I'm not finished. If any of your men give me trouble, I handle it myself first. I come to you only if I can't resolve it. And if you can't, then I'll tell you and you'll handle it, without asking me to leave." Something moved across his face. It wasn't quite respect, not yet. It was something that might become respect if given sufficient evidence. "Agreed," he said. "Then I'll start Monday morning," Abigail said, and picked up her hammer. The Walker Ranch was everything the Collins place was not, or rather everything the Collins place had not yet become. The barn was solid. The bunkhouse was maintained. The main house was a long, low, practical building that had clearly been built for function first and for anything else, second or not at all. There were 11 men working the operation, a mix of ages and temperaments, and they looked at Abigail on that first Monday morning with the full range of expressions she had come to expect. Some looked at her face. Some looked at the rest of her. Some did both, moving from one to the other with the subtlety of men who believed themselves subtle. A heavy-set man named Gus, who appeared to be somewhere between 45 and 60, and to have formed his opinions about the world several decades ago and seen no particular reason to revise them, said loud enough for her to hear from the kitchen doorway, "She's going to eat more than she cooks." Nobody laughed. Nobody told him to shut up either. Abigail set down her basket, tied her apron, and started on breakfast. She made biscuits from scratch. She made gravy from the drippings she found in the bottom of the stove pan. She scrambled 18 eggs and fried salt pork and made a pot of coffee that was strong enough to stand a spoon in. When she put it on the table, there was a silence. Not the good silence. The assessing silence. The let's see silence. Gus took a biscuit, broke it open, put butter on it, and ate it. He reached for another one without looking up from his plate. That was that. She had the ledger sorted by Tuesday. The previous system had been a collection of receipts in a tobacco tin and a set of numbers written in pencil on the inside of a cabinet door, which was not a system at all, just a deferral of eventual catastrophe. She set up a proper ledger with monthly columns, tracked inventory against consumption, and found immediately that someone had been overcharging for grain delivery by about 30% for the past 8 months. She left the ledger open on Nathan Walker's desk with a note that said, "The grain supplier's invoices do not match the delivery records. I have marked the discrepancies." She was back at the Collins place that evening working on the bedroom window frame when she heard a horse come up the road at a pace that suggested intention. Nathan Walker came through the gap in the fence where the gate used to be and stopped. "You found it in one day," he said. The ledger wasn't complicated. The system was just disorganized. 8 months. Yes. He took his hat off, put it back on. "Who told you to look at the grain invoices?" he asked. "Nobody. I looked at everything." He was quiet for a moment. "Do you know how much that is?" he said. $47 approximately. I can calculate it precisely if you want the exact figure." He looked at her. The look was not the look she knew. It was not the apologetic, dismissive look, not the assessing look, not the girl like you look. It was the look of a man encountering something he had not expected and was still working out the shape of. "I'll deal with the grain supplier tomorrow," he said. "You'll want to have the documentation ready before you confront him. I've written it out." "You've written it out." "The numbers are clear. He can't argue against numbers." Nathan Walker stood there in the gap where the gate used to be and looked at Abigail Carter standing beside her half-repaired house in the last of the evening light. "Anything else?" he asked. "Your cattle records are 4 months behind," she said. "And someone's been logging a mare named Duchess on the work roster that I couldn't find in the paddock count." He put his hat back on. "I'll look into the mare," he said. The cattle records can wait until next week if you need time. I don't need time. Then I'll have the cattle ledger ready by Thursday. He turned the horse. Miss Carter, he said. Mr. Walker. The biscuits this morning. She waited. They were the best I've had in 3 years, he said, since my mother died. He rode east before she could decide what to do with that. She did not let herself think about Nathan Walker in any particular way. She was very careful about this. She had $22 in the world, 9 of which remained after supplies, and she had a house that was not legally hers, and a job that required her to impress 11 skeptical men 3 times a day. She did not have the luxury of thinking about a man in any way that wasn't strictly professional, and she knew herself well enough to know that any other kind of thinking would create complications she couldn't afford. She thought about him anyway sometimes in the half hour before sleep when she was too tired to prevent it. She thought about the way he had said, "I see that," looking at her house. She thought about how he had not used the look. She thought about the best I've had in 3 years. She told herself these were not thoughts worth having and fell asleep before she could argue with herself too effectively. Gus was not done. She had expected this. Men like Gus never made one comment and considered the matter settled. They needed to establish something to locate the boundary of how much pushback they would encounter, and they tested it incrementally. The second week, he knocked a serving dish off the table deliberately, she was almost certain, and looked at her as if expecting her to either flinch or snap. She picked up the dish, checked it for damage, set it back on the table. "Clumsy morning, Gus," she said pleasantly. He narrowed his eyes. The third week, he told one of the younger hands within her clear hearing that he'd seen pigs with more natural grace, and he laughed at his own cleverness. The younger, a boy of about 19, named Clem, did not laugh. He looked at his plate instead, which she appreciated. She finished serving the table and walked back to the kitchen and stood at the stove for a moment. She thought about her father, who had told her when she was 11 years old and came home crying from school. "Abigail, you have 2 choices with people like that. You can let them make you smaller, or you can make them irrelevant. Only one of those is in your control." She thought about this. Then she baked Gus a personal portion of apple cake and set it at his place at supper. He looked at it, looked at her. "What's this?" he said. "Apple cake. The apples are from your tree, actually. The one behind the bunkhouse. They're coming ripe." "I didn't ask for special treatment." "It's not special treatment. I made one for everyone. Yours is just the first one on the table because you're at the head." He looked at the cake. He ate it. After supper, she heard him tell Clem in what he probably thought was a quiet voice, "That woman can cook." It was not an apology. She hadn't been looking for one. But it was the beginning of the end of the testing, which was what she had wanted. She was fixing the bedroom ceiling. A section had water damage, and she'd been working on it a piece at a time between her hours at the ranch when Nathan Walker appeared in the doorway. She had not heard his horse. "You're going to give yourself a crick in your neck doing that up there," he said. "I've had a crick in my neck for 2 weeks. It's becoming familiar." He looked at the ceiling, at the work she'd done, at the bucket of plaster she'd made from lime she'd found in the barn, and water, and considerable experimentation. "Where did you learn to plaster?" he said. "From my father. He was not a man who believed certain skills belonged to certain people." "Your father sounds like a sensible man." "He was the best person I ever knew," she said. "He died in February." Silence. "I'm sorry," Nathan Walker said, in the way people say it when they actually mean it, which is less common than the words suggest. She kept working. "The Collins children," he said after a moment. "I know the attorney in town who handles their affairs. If you want, I could make an inquiry about purchasing the property at a fair price." Her hand stopped. She turned and looked at him from her position on the step stool she was using as a ladder. "Why would you do that?" she said. He seemed to consider the question seriously. "Because you're building something that belongs to you," he said. "And that's a harder thing to take from a person than an abandoned property that nobody wanted." She looked at him for a long time. "I would want to buy it myself," she said. "When I have the money. I don't want it given or arranged." "I understand that." But an introduction to the attorney, she said slowly, would be useful. He nodded. I'll arrange it, he said. He turned to leave. Mr. Walker, she said. He stopped. The mare, she said. Duchess. Did you find her? His jaw tightened slightly. Just slightly. She died, he said. Last winter. One of my hands didn't want to record it. Thought it was bad luck. The record needs to be corrected. I know it does. I'll do it Thursday when I update the cattle ledger. Thank you, Miss Carter. He left. She stood on her step stool with her plastering trowel and looked at the ceiling section she'd been working on and thought about a man who had built a ranch alone and kept the records of a dead horse because one of his hands had thought bad luck was worse than dishonesty. She thought about what it meant to build something and be afraid of what it would mean if any part of it failed. She understood that feeling very well. She understood it better than she understood almost anything else in the world. She went back to work. By the end of June, the house was livable. By the middle of July, it was more than that. She had the roof sound. She had the windows hung and glazed. She had the cook stove functioning and the pump running clean and the bedroom ceiling plastered smooth and the porch solid enough to sit on in the evenings when the heat finally broke and the Wyoming night came down cool and enormous and full of more stars than Missouri had ever shown her. She sat on her porch some evenings and listened to the crickets and the distant sound of cattle settling and the enormous silence that was not really silence at all, but just a different kind of sound than she had grown up with. She sat there and she thought nobody wanted this place. Nobody wanted me either. Look at us now. She was not without loneliness. She was not so determined or so practical that she could make herself not feel the particular ache of a woman of 25 who had come west looking for a life that included someone to build it with, and who had found instead a fine house and good work, and 11 men who now ate her cooking without complaint, and one man who looked at her like she was a problem he was beginning to suspect was actually an answer. But loneliness was not the same thing as helplessness. She had learned that distinction early, and she had learned it well, and she held on to it on the evenings when the stars were very bright and the silence pressed in close, and she let herself feel just briefly the full weight of everything she was carrying alone. Then she went inside. She got up the next morning. She made biscuits. She went to work. The morning Abigail found the dead calf by the east fence line. She almost didn't report it. Not because she didn't think it mattered, because she had learned in 6 weeks of working the Walker Ranch that every piece of information she brought to Nathan Walker's attention was first filtered through a question she couldn't answer yet. Did he want her that involved? She had fixed his ledger. She had caught his grain supplier stealing from him. She had reorganized his supply pantry and cross-referenced his cattle records and made 11 skeptical men eat her food without complaint. And Nathan Walker had thanked her for every single one of those things with the particular economy of a man who meant what he said and said only what he meant, which was to say briefly, directly, and without embellishment. But she still didn't know where the line was. She found out that morning. She reported the calf a heifer young, no visible injury, just dead in the grass, and Nathan Walker walked the east fence line with her in the early morning and found 3 more sections of fence wire cut clean through. Not broken. Cut. Someone did this on purpose, he said. Yes, she said. He crouched down and looked at the cut wire for a long moment. She stood beside him and waited. This is the 3rd time in 2 months, he said, and his voice had a quality she hadn't heard before, not anger, not quite, but the thing that lives underneath anger when a man has been keeping it pressed down for a while and it's starting to push back. 3rd time, she said. The other 2. Water trough sabotaged in May. Feed storage broken into in June, half the grain supply contaminated with river mud. She looked at him. You didn't mention this when you hired me. It wasn't your concern. Mr. Walker, she said carefully, I manage your supply ledger. Contaminated grain and sabotaged water infrastructure are directly relevant to my work. He stood up, looked at the fence, looked east toward the property line. It's Harlan Greer, he said. She had heard that name. In the way you hear things in a ranch town, in fragments, in the pauses between sentences, in the things people don't finish saying. The man with the property to the east, she said. I wants this land, Has wanted it for 15 years since before my father died and left it to me. He made offers. My father refused. He made offers to me when I took over. I refused. Nathan's jaw was tight. He's moved to other methods. Have you gone to the sheriff? 3 times. No proof. Greer's careful. She looked at the cut wire. He'll be less careful, she said slowly, if he thinks he's winning. Nathan looked at her. What does that mean? It means, she said, that people who believe they have the upper hand get impatient. They take shortcuts. If Greer thinks this is working, that you're being worn down, he'll move faster, move bigger. And the bigger the action, the harder it is to hide. He was quiet for a moment. You're suggesting I let him think he's winning. I'm suggesting you don't rush to repair the fence, she said. Repair it, but not immediately. Let him see it standing broken for a few days. Let him feel confident. Nathan Walker looked at her for a long time. And then we make sure you're watching when he moves again. We, she had said. She heard it the second after it left her mouth and wondered if he would correct it. He didn't. All right, he said. 3 days. He walked back toward the house. She followed. Miss Carter, he said without turning around. Yes. When I hired you, I told the men you were the cook and the ledger keeper. Yes. I may have undersold the position. She didn't let herself smile until he was far enough ahead that he couldn't see her face. The trouble with Gus resolved itself in a way she hadn't expected, which was that Gus resolved it himself. It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of brutal July Tuesday, where the heat came down like a physical thing, and tempers went thin and frayed at the edges. She was in the kitchen at midday when she heard raised voices in the yard. She went to the door. Gus was standing in front of a man she didn't recognize. Young early 20s, the type of handsome that came packaged with a very high opinion of itself. The young man was a ranch hand named Dale, who had started 2 weeks ago and had apparently been working his way through the other hands with carefully calibrated slights and condescensions, establishing a hierarchy he had invented for himself. At the moment, Dale was making a comment about Abigail. She couldn't hear all of it from the doorway, but she heard enough. The word fat and the word waste and something about whether Nathan Walker had lost his mind or just his standards. She started to step out. Gus stepped in first. He was not a small man, Gus, and he moved with the particular authority of a man who had been on working ranches for 30 years and had no remaining patience for people who had been on them for 2 weeks. You want to say that again? Gus said. His voice was very quiet. That was how she knew it was serious. Gus's volume went down, not up, when he meant business. Dale blinked. He hadn't expected this particular source of pushback. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking, Dale said. Nobody's thinking that, Gus said. And if they are, they ain't saying it in this yard, not while I'm standing in it. Dale looked around for support, found none. She's the cook, he said a little less certainly. She caught the grain supplier stealing from us for 8 months, Gus said. In 1 day. She fixed the east pump that's been giving trouble since March. She runs the supply ledger better than anyone we've had in 10 years, and I've been here for 10 years. So I reckon she can be whatever shape she is, and it's none of your business and none of mine. Dale said nothing. You got something to do, Gus said. Dale left. Abigail went back to the kitchen before Gus turned around. When he came in for lunch, she set his plate in front of him without comment. He ate without comment. After the meal, he carried his own plate to the wash basin, which he had never done before. Thank you, ma'am, he said. She kept her face neutral. Thank you, Gus, she said. He left. She stood in the kitchen for a moment, with her hands flat on the work table, and took a breath that went all the way down, the kind of breath you take when something you'd been tensed against for a long time finally shifts. She had not cried in 6 weeks. She almost did then. She didn't. She started on supper instead. The attorney's name was Mercer, and he met with her on a Wednesday afternoon in his office on Main Street, and he confirmed what she had suspected: the Collins heirs had no interest in the property and would sell for back taxes and a fair price, which he put at approximately $80. $80. She had $31 saved. She had, if she kept to her current saving pace, approximately 4 months of wages still needed before she could make the purchase. 4 months was not forever. 4 months was manageable. What was less manageable was what Mercer told her next. You should know, Miss Carter, that Mr. Harlan Greer has also expressed interest in that property. She kept her expression level. When? She said. About 10 days ago. He made an inquiry. And the heirs? Haven't responded to either party yet. They're in no hurry. It's not a pressing financial matter for them. She thought about this. If Mr. Greer were to make a formal offer before I have the full purchase price, she said carefully, would the heirs consider a payment arrangement? It's possible, Mercer said. But Greer would offer cash. Cash typically wins. She walked back to the Collins place. Her place, she had started thinking of it that way. A habit that could become a liability, and she sat on her porch and she thought, Greer wanted the Walker Ranch. The Walker Ranch bordered the Collins property on the west. If Greer owned both the Collins property and his own land to the east, Nathan Walker would have Greer on two sides. The Collins property wasn't incidental. It was part of the strategy, and she was living on it. She rode to the Walker Ranch the next morning, found Nathan in the yard before the day's work started, and told him what Mercer had said. Howe was quiet for a moment that lasted longer than most of his silences. He's positioning, Nathan said. Yes, if he gets the Collins property, you have him on two sides. He can restrict your water access from the East Creek, and he can block the southern road. I know what he can do. She had no doubt of that. She pressed on anyway. I need to buy that property before he does, she said. I'm short. I have $31. I need $80. He looked at her. I can lend you the difference, he said. No. Miss Carter. No, she said again, and her voice was steady and clear. I won't borrow from you. Not while I'm working for you. It changes the arrangement. How? Because then I owe you something I can't repay in labor, and that creates a situation where you have more power than I'm comfortable with. Something moved across his face. It wasn't offense. It looked more like he was working out a problem he hadn't fully considered. I could advance your wages, he said. She thought about this. 2 months advance, she said. Taken back from wages over 6 months. That's $48. You're still short. I'll manage the rest. How? I'll bake, she said. He looked at her. I'll sell to the boarding house and the saloon and whoever else will buy. I've had 3 women in town ask where I do my baking since the church social last month. She had brought 2 pies to the church social at Clem's invitation, and they had been consumed with a speed that was almost alarming. Give me 3 weeks. Nathan Walker looked at the horizon for a moment. 2 months advance, he said. Starting today. Starting today, she agreed. They shook hands. His hand was large and rough and warm, and he held hers for exactly the right amount of time, long enough to be serious, short enough to be professional, and then he let go. She rode back to town and made arrangements with the baker's wife, a woman named Susanna Pratt, who was enthusiastic about the plan and had a commercial oven and knew everyone in Laramie who had a sweet tooth or a dinner party coming up. She baked for 3 weeks. She made pies, cakes, bread rolls, molasses cookies and sugar cookies and ginger snaps. She made a sweet potato pudding that caused Susanna Pratt to sit down and put her hand over her heart. She made 4 dozen biscuits for the hotel dining room at $1.50 per dozen. She came home every night with flour in her hair and money in her pocket, and the specific satisfaction of someone who has found the precise limit of what they can do and then done slightly more than that. At the end of 3 weeks, she had $93. She bought the Collins property on a Friday afternoon. She walked out of Mercer's office with a deed in her hand and stood on the wooden sidewalk and looked at the street and thought about Thomas Aldridge's thin letter and Miss Caldwell's porch and Dorothea's voice. Who is ever going to want all of you? All of her had just purchased 40 acres and a house in Laramie County, Wyoming. She walked to the livery, collected her horse, and rode home. She told Nathan the next morning. He looked at the deed she placed on his desk, and he looked at her, and he said, 3 weeks. Yes. You made $62 in 3 weeks baking. $62 and some change, yes. He set the deed down. "Greer's going to be furious," he said. "I expect so. He's going to come at you directly now. He can't threaten your property anymore, so he'll threaten your standing." He paused. "Your reputation." She had considered this. "Let him try," she said. Nathan looked at her. "Miss Carter," he said, "I want you to understand what I'm saying. Harlan Greer is not a man who makes idle moves. If he decides to damage your reputation in this town, he has the means to do it. He knows people. He'll use them." "I know," she said. "But my reputation is built on what I actually do, and what I actually do is visible and documented." She touched the corner of the deed. "The ledger, the baking, the house. These things exist. Rumors don't change what exists. Rumors change what people see when they look at something that exists. Then I'll have to make sure what exists is too big to misrepresent." He was quiet. "You've been thinking about this," he said. "I think about most things," she said. "That's generally how I stay ahead of them." Nathan Walker leaned back in his chair and looked at her with the expression she had come to think of as his recalibrating expression, the one where she had said something that required him to adjust whatever framework he had been operating from. She was getting used to that expression. She was not. She told herself firmly, allowing herself to like it. Greer moved faster than she had expected. She had anticipated a social campaign whispers, careful insinuations, the slow erosion of reputation that required months. She had not anticipated that Greer would appear in the flesh at the Walker Ranch on a Saturday afternoon, unannounced and uninvited, with two men at his back and a smile that belonged on something predatory. She was in the kitchen when she heard the horses. She went to the window and looked, and she saw Harlan Greer for the first time. He was a big man, not tall, but broad, with the particular physical confidence of someone who had not experienced much consequence for his actions in some time. He had a gray mustache and small watchful eyes, and he wore his clothes expensively enough to make sure everyone noticed the expense. She watched Nathan come out of the barn. "Greer," Nathan said. His voice was flat. No greeting, no courtesy, just the name. "Walker." Greer looked around the yard with the proprietary air of someone mentally redrawing the lines. "Heard you hired some woman to run your kitchen." "I hired a cook and a ledger manager," Nathan said. "Is that what you came to talk about?" "I came to make you a fair offer on this property." Greer smiled. "Same offer I made your father. Same offer I've made you 3 times. I'm prepared to be generous. My answer is the same as it's always been." "Things change," Greer said. "Man gets tired. Operations get harder to run." His eyes flicked toward the house. "Especially when you're getting distracted by charity cases." Nathan didn't move. Didn't change expression. But something in the quality of his stillness shifted, and Abigail, watching from the window, recognized the change because she had seen it once before with Gus. The stillness that came before something. "You need to leave my property," Nathan said. "Walker. Now Greer." Greer looked at him for a moment. Looked at the house again. Something passed across his face, a calculation, a reassessment. "I'll be seeing you," he said, and turned his horse. His 2 men followed. When they were gone, Nathan stood in the yard for a moment without moving. Then he came inside. He stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at her. "How much of that did you hear?" he said. "Most of it. He called you a charity case." "I noticed." "I should have." "You handled it correctly," she said. "Anything more would have escalated it. You want him overconfident, not cornered." He looked at her. "You're not angry," he said. It came out like a question and an observation at the same time. "I'm furious," she said evenly. "But fury isn't useful until you know exactly where to put it." He was quiet for a moment. "My father used to say something like that," he said. She turned back to the stove. "What happened to your father?" she said, not pushing, just opening a door, leaving it open. A pause. "He worked himself into the ground for 30 years building this ranch," Nathan said. "And then he died before he got to stop working." "Did he love it, the ranch?" "Yes." "Then maybe he didn't think of it as working himself into the ground. Maybe he just thought of it as his life." Another silence, longer this time. Maybe, Nathan said. He didn't leave. He stood in the doorway while she cooked, and she let him stand there, and neither of them spoke. And it was the most comfortable silence she had experienced in longer than she could precisely remember. The rumor reached her on a Monday through Susanna Pratt, which was the fastest possible route given Susanna's comprehensive knowledge of Laramie's social topology. Susanna came into the kitchen at the Walker Ranch at an unusual hour mid-morning, when she knew Abigail would be between breakfast and the lunch preparation, and she had the tight, urgent expression of someone carrying information they both wanted and hated to deliver. "There's a story going around," Susanna said. Abigail kept chopping. "Tell me." "Someone is saying that your relationship with Mr. Walker is—" Susanna lowered her voice, even though they were alone. "That it's not a professional arrangement." Abigail set down the knife. "Who is saying this?" "It started at the saloon. Bill Greer, Harlan's nephew. He works the bar. He told someone who told someone. You know how it goes." "What exactly is being said?" Susanna pressed her lips together. "That you positioned yourself. That you knew what you were doing when you took this job. That you're taking advantage of Mr. Walker's—" She stopped. Tried again. "That a man who would hire a woman like you must have reasons other than cooking and bookkeeping." The kitchen was very quiet. "A woman like you." There it was. Abigail picked up the knife, started chopping again. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "Abigail." "I'm fine, Susanna." "It's not right. Anyone who knows you—" "I know," she said. "Thank you." Susanna left. Abigail finished the vegetable prep and set a pot of beans to soaking and wiped down the work table, and then she stood very still with her hands flat on the surface and looked at the middle distance and thought about all of it. She thought about Greer. About how this was exactly what Nathan had warned her about. About how she had said, "I'll have to make sure what exists is too big to misrepresent," and how she believed that, and how it was still hard when the misrepresentation arrived to feel how hard it could hit. She thought about what her father would say. He would say, "What do you actually control? Not the rumor. Not Greer. Not what people believed in the first 10 seconds before they thought it through. What she controlled: her work, her conduct, her property deed, the ledger, the baking receipts, the testimony of 11 men who ate her cooking, and the fact that Nathan Walker, whose reputation in this county was 38 years of scrupulous honesty, had hired her and kept her and thanked her with the brevity of a man who only thanked you when he meant it. She controlled all of that. She picked up a pen and started updating the cattle ledger. Nathan found out about the rumor the same day, apparently from a different source, and he came to find her that evening at the Collins place, where she was replanting the kitchen garden she'd been establishing along the south wall. He came through the gate. She had a proper gate, now repaired and rehung, and he stood on the path, and he looked at her on her knees in the garden with dirt on her hands, and he said without preamble, "I heard what Greer's people are saying. I know. Susanna told me this morning. It's not—" "I know what it is," she said. "It's a tactic. He can't have your ranch and he can't have my property, so he's trying to make it impossible for me to stay in this county. I'm going to the sheriff." "With what?" She sat back on her heels and looked up at him. "A rumor isn't actionable. There's nothing to show him." "Then I'll make a public statement. In town. Nathan." It was the first time she had used his given name. She hadn't planned it. It came out because the moment required it. A man publicly defending a woman's honor makes the story larger, not smaller. People will talk about the defense, and they'll remember what they were defending against. He stopped, looked at her. She saw it land, the logic of it, the frustration of the logic. "So I do nothing," he said. "You do what you've always done," she said. "You run your ranch honestly, you treat your people fairly, and you let your actual life speak louder than anyone else's story about it." She paused. "And I do the same." He crouched down then, which put them at eye level, which she hadn't expected. "You're not frightened," he said. It wasn't quite a statement. "I'm a little frightened," she said. "But I'm more angry than frightened, and angry is more useful." He looked at her for a long moment. "My mother would have liked you," he said. She didn't know what to do with that. She went back to her planting. He crouched there for another moment. I made inquiries, he said. About Greer. About where the money came from that he used to buy out the Morrison property 2 years ago. She paused in her work. And? It's not clean money, he said. I don't have the documentation yet, but there are people who know things. I'm working on getting it in writing. If you can document where that money came from, she said slowly. Greer doesn't just lose the campaign against you. He loses everything. Yes. That's why he's moving fast. He knows someone's looking. Maybe. She sat back and looked at him. Who else is looking? She said. A land commissioner out of Cheyenne. He's been making quiet inquiries for about 3 months. Nathan paused. He reached out to me last week. He wants to meet. When? Next Friday. She looked at the kitchen garden. At the seedlings she'd set in. At the south wall of her house, solid and replastered, and hers. You should have your ledger documentation ready, she said. Everything that shows the pattern of interference. The grain supplier, the water trough, the feed contamination, the cut wire. Dated and documented. I have most of it. I'll put it together this week, she said. In a format the commissioner can use. He was quiet. Miss Carter, he said. Abigail, she said without thinking. If we're going to do this, you might as well call me Abigail. He was quiet for a moment. Abigail, he said. Her name and his voice sounded different than it did in anyone else's. Steadier, more considered, like he had decided it meant something and was choosing it carefully. I need you to know that what Greer is saying is not that I don't think of you. I know, she said. I want to say it anyway. She looked at him. His jaw was tight, and his eyes were direct, and he was... She understood not comfortable with this kind of conversation, with any conversation that required him to locate a feeling and then say it out loud, but he was doing it anyway. You came here alone, he said. You had nothing and no one sent you, and no one helped you, and you built something real. What Greer is saying about you has nothing to do with who you actually are, and I wanted you to hear me say that directly. She looked at him for a moment. Thank you, she said. That matters to me. Good, he said, as if the transaction had been concluded satisfactorily, and stood up. She looked back at her garden. Nathan, she said. He stopped. What happened with the woman who left you? The silence stretched for a long moment. She thought she might have gone too far. She got ready to take it back, to soften it, to tell him it was none of her business. She didn't leave me, he said. I ended it. Why? Because she told me very clearly that what she wanted was the ranch, not me. The ranch and what it represented. He paused. She wasn't cruel about it. She just said it plainly, like she thought I might appreciate the honesty. Did you? A longer pause. Eventually, he said. Not at the time. She nodded. He left. She knelt in the garden until the light went, and her knees ached, and the seedlings were all in and watered. And then she sat on her porch in the dark, and she let herself feel just for a moment all the things she was carefully not letting herself feel during the daylight. She thought about a man who had been loved for his property and not his person. She thought about a woman who had been rejected for her person because of how her person looked. She thought that they were in different ways, both working on the same problem. She sat on her porch until the stars came fully out, enormous and indifferent and beautiful. Then she went inside and put the documentation together for the land commissioner. She worked until midnight. It was, she thought, the best case she had ever built. She hoped it would be enough. The land commissioner's name was Aldous Finch, and he arrived on a Friday morning in a wagon that was too clean for Wyoming and a suit that was too pressed for August. And Abigail decided within 30 seconds of watching him climb down that he was either very good at his job or very bad at it, and that the difference would matter enormously in the next several hours. She had the documentation ready on Nathan's desk. 41 pages. Every incident dated, every discrepancy, numbered, every invoice cross-referenced against the delivery record. She had written a summary page at the front that laid out the pattern in plain language, not accusatory, not emotional, just factual and sequential and impossible to misread. Nathan had looked at it the night before and said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "You should have been a lawyer." She had said women aren't lawyers. He had said you should have been the first one. She thought about that while she made coffee for 3. Finch came inside, accepted the coffee, sat down across from Nathan's desk, and opened Abigail's documentation package. He read the summary page, looked up. "Who prepared this?" he said. "I did," Abigail said from the doorway. Finch looked at her, looked at Nathan, looked back at her. "You're the cook," he said. "Among other things," she said. He went back to the documents and didn't speak again for 20 minutes. The only sound was the occasional page turning, and once a low sound that might have been a whistle held back. When he finished, he set the package down and folded his hands on top of it. "Mr. Walker," he said, "I have been investigating Harlan Greer for 14 months. What I have been missing is exactly what is in this file." He paused. "A documented pattern of interference tied to specific dates and specific financial losses." Nathan said nothing. "This is enough to open a formal investigation," Finch said. "Combined with what we already have on the Morrison property transaction, I believe we can build a case that will remove Greer from this county permanently." The room was quiet. Then Nathan said, "How long?" "Months," Finch said. "These things move slowly, but they move." He looked at Abigail again. "Miss Carter," he said, "would you be willing to provide a formal statement?" "Yes," she said. "Tell me what you need." She gave the statement that afternoon. 3 pages signed. Finch folded it carefully into his coat pocket and looked at her one more time before he left with the expression of a man recalculating something he thought he'd already finished calculating. When his wagon rolled out of the yard, she and Nathan stood side by side in the space where it had been, and neither of them spoke for a moment. "It started," she said. "Yes," he said. "Greer will know soon." "Probably." "Then we're running out of quiet time," she said. Nathan turned to look at her. "What does that mean?" "It means whatever he's going to do, he'll do it before Finch can build the case. He's going to move, and he's going to move hard, and we need to be ready." Nathan was quiet. "I've been ready for 15 years, he said, and went back into the barn. She watched him go and thought that readiness and preparedness were 2 entirely different things, and she hoped he understood the distinction, and she started planning for the version of events where he didn't. The first sign that Greer had heard about Finch came 4 days later when 3 of Nathan's ranch hands quit on the same Tuesday morning. Not Gus, not Clem. 3 of the newer men who had been on the payroll less than a year, men who gave their notice with the particular evasiveness of people who had been told something and paid something and didn't want to be in the building when the ceiling came down. Nathan stood in the yard and watched them go, and his face did not change. Then he came inside and stood in the kitchen doorway and said, "He's pulling workers." He's trying to cripple you before harvest," she said. She had been waiting for something like this. "What's your timeline for the cattle drive?" 6 weeks. "Can you do it with 8 men?" "I can do it with 7 if they're the right 7. "Then we recruit," she said. "Today, before Greer gets to anyone else. I know the men in this county. I know the men in this county who owe money to the mercantile and haven't found steady work since the Morrison spread shut down," she said. "I've been doing your supply ledger for 2 months. I know who gets paid and who doesn't. I know who comes to Susanna's bakery looking for day-old bread." He looked at her. "There's a man named Rourke," she said. "Older. Used to run the Morrison cattle operation before Greer bought it out. He's been doing odd jobs. He came in last week for bread." She paused. "He'd know your operation in a day, and he'd work hard because he needs the work and because he has his own reasons for not being fond of Harlan Greer." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "I'll find him today," he said. "There are 2 others. I'll write down the names." She wrote the names. He took the paper without looking at it and folded it into his shirt pocket. "Abigail," he said. She looked up. "How do you know all of this?" "I pay attention," she said. "And people tell things to the woman who feeds them that they wouldn't tell anyone else." He looked at her for a moment longer than was strictly necessary for the conversation they were having. She held his gaze because she had learned that looking away first cost more than holding on did. "I'll be back by evening," he said. He came back with Rourke and both of the men she'd named, and all three were working by the following morning. Gus looked at Rourke across the breakfast table, with the evaluating squint of a man who knew a real ranch hand from a pretender, and apparently reached a satisfactory conclusion because he passed the biscuit basket without comment, which was the closest Gus came to a formal welcome. The fire started on a Thursday night. She smelled it first. She was asleep in her house on the Collins property, the deep, boneless sleep of someone who had been working 16-hour days for 2 months, and she came awake with her heart already beating fast before she understood why. Smoke. She was at the window before she was fully conscious, and she saw the orange glow against the black sky to the east toward the Walker Ranch, and she was dressed and on her horse in 4 minutes. She rode hard. The barn was burning. Not the main structure she could see as she came into the yard that it was the feed storage barn, the smaller outbuilding on the east side of the property, the one closest to Greer's property line, the one they had repaired and restocked after the June contamination, the one that held the hay and grain supply they needed for the cattle drive. Men were running. The bucket chain was already formed. Nathan at the front, Gus behind him, Rourke and Clem and the others, moving water with the efficiency of men who had been shouted awake and found their positions without needing to be told. She was off her horse and into the chain before she had consciously decided to taking a position between Clem and a man named Torres, passing buckets with both hands, her arms burning almost immediately, not stopping. They worked for 2 hours. They saved the main barn. They saved the horses. They lost the feed storage building entirely and about a third of the supplies inside it. When it was over, they stood in the yard in the early morning and nobody spoke for a while. Nathan looked at the burned structure. His face in the first gray light was something she had not seen before. Not anger, not grief exactly, but the look of a man measuring the distance between where he stood and the edge of something and calculating whether he could stay on the right side of it. "The cattle drive is in 6 weeks, Gus said. His voice was rough from smoke. "I know," Nathan said. "We don't have the feed to sustain the herd until then." "I know, Gus." Silence. Abigail looked at the burn, looked at Nathan, looked at the eastern property line where the sky was lightening, and somewhere beyond it, Harlan Greer was sleeping in his house. "How much did we lose?" she said. 60% of the hay supply, Nathan said. "About half the grain." "How much does a full resupply cost?" A pause. "More than I have liquid right now," he said quietly. "How much more?" he told her. She did the math in her head. "I have $61, she said. "In the house. You can have it." "No." "Nathan." "No," he said, and his voice had a quality she had not heard from him before. Something cracked in it just slightly, just enough to hear the edge. "That's your property fund. That's your money. You earned it." "My property is purchased," she said. "The deed is filed. That money is for improvement work that can wait." "I won't take your savings." "Then consider it a loan at the same terms you gave me the wage advance," she said. "We'll write it down." He looked at her. "Abigail, we are not having an argument about money at 5 in the morning after a fire," she said. "We are going to figure out what we need, and then we are going to figure out where to get it, and then we are going to get it. That's what you do when something burns down." The men around them were very quiet. Gus, after a moment, cleared his throat. "I've got $14, he said. "Saved up." Clem said, "I got 7. Rourke said, $8.50. Torres said something in Spanish that Clem translated as, "He says he's got $6, and he was going to send it to his sister, but she can wait a month." Nathan looked at his men. He looked at Abigail. Something moved across his face that she could not entirely name, but it was large, and it was not something he was expecting to feel in that moment, and he stood very still while he felt it. "Write it all down," he said finally to her. "Every dollar. I'll pay everyone back with interest before the cattle drive is done." "Obviously," she said. She went to get her ledger. They were short $112 after everyone's contribution. She sat at Nathan's desk that night with the numbers in front of her and the lamp burning low, And she turned the problem over and over, the way she had turned problems her whole life, looking for the angle, the approach, the thing everyone else had missed. Then she thought about Finch. She thought about what he had said 14 months. He had been investigating Greer for 14 months, which meant he had resources, which meant he had a department, which meant somewhere in the chain above Finch was someone who had authorized those 14 months and those resources because they wanted Greer stopped. She wrote a letter, not to Finch directly, to the land office in Cheyenne, addressed to the commissioner's supervising officer, a man named Hartwell, whose name she had found in the letterhead on the document Finch had left with Nathan. She wrote clearly and briefly about the fire, about the pattern of interference, about the timeline of the investigation, and the potential for evidence destruction if the investigation moved too slowly while Greer continued his campaign. She wrote, "The ranch at the center of this investigation cannot sustain another deliberate attack and remain operational through the cattle drive season. If the operation fails before your case is built, you lose your primary witness and your primary documented victim. I believe that is in no one's interest." She signed her name and sealed the envelope. She rode to town the next morning and mailed it before she made breakfast. She didn't tell Nathan. Greer showed up 3 days after the fire. He came alone this time, which was either bold or stupid or both. And he came in the mid-afternoon when the men were out working and only Abigail was at the ranch house, and later she would understand that the timing was deliberate. She heard the horse. She came out of the kitchen. He looked at her with the particular expression of a man who had spent his life looking at things and categorizing them by their usefulness, and had already categorized her. "Miss Carter," he said. "Mr. Greer," she said. "Walker's not here." "No." "Good." He didn't dismount. "I'd rather speak with you directly." She waited. "I'm going to make this simple," he said. "You're a smart woman, I can see that. You've built yourself a tidy little situation here. The property, the job, the—" He paused, and the pause was unkind. "The arrangement with Walker." "There is no arrangement," she said. "There's employment." "Of course," he said in a tone that meant the opposite. "I want you to understand something, Miss Carter. What's happening with Walker's ranch is going to continue happening. He's going to lose this operation. Maybe not this month, maybe not next month. But he's going to lose it. Men like Nathan Walker." His voice dropped into something almost sympathetic. "They build things alone, and then they run them alone, and they're too proud to bend, and eventually something breaks them." She said nothing. "What I'm offering you," Greer said, "is a way out before that happens. I'll buy your property at twice what you paid for it. $160, cash, today." She looked at him. "And if I sell, then you take your money and you go somewhere that suits you better. Start over. You've got brains and you've got skills. You'll land on your feet." The offer sat between them. She understood exactly what it was. It was not generosity. It was a removal. He wanted her gone because she was the documentation. She was the paper trail, the ledger, the 41 pages that Finch now had in his coat pocket. He wanted her gone, and he was willing to pay for it because the alternative was slower and messier. "Mr. Greer," she said. "Yes." "Do you know why I came to Wyoming?" He blinked. He hadn't expected a question. "I came here because a man wrote me 14 letters telling me he wanted a capable woman, and then canceled the arrangement when he found out what I looked like," she said. "I lost everything I'd saved. I arrived in this town with $22 and no one waiting and no plan. And I built something anyway." She paused. "I built a business. I bought land. I documented the systematic destruction of my employer's property and handed it to a federal investigator." Greer's expression shifted. "So when you sit on your horse and offer me twice my purchase price to go away quietly," she said, "what you should understand is that there is no price for quiet. I am not a problem you can solve by paying it to leave. I am a person who builds things, and I have built things here, and I am not going anywhere." The silence stretched. Greer's face had gone very still. "You're making an enemy," he said. "You were already my enemy," she said. "You burned the feed barn. I know you did. So does Aldous Finch." She watched it happen, the slight contraction around his eyes, the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw. The tell of a man hearing his own name in a context he hadn't expected. "I don't know who that is," he said. "Yes, you do," she said. "He's the land commissioner who's been investigating you for 14 months. He has my documentation now. And in about 3 days, he's going to have a letter from me to his supervisor in Cheyenne explaining that your campaign is escalating and the timeline needs to accelerate." She paused. "Unless that letter already arrived, in which case the timeline has already accelerated." Greer stared at her. "You have no idea what you're doing," he said. "I really do, though," she said. "Good afternoon, Mr. Greer." She went back inside. She stood in the kitchen with her back against the wall and her heart slamming against her ribs, and she breathed carefully and deliberately until she heard his horse leave. Then she sat down on the kitchen floor and put her face in her hands for approximately 2 minutes. Then she stood up and started dinner. She told Nathan that evening, every word of it. She had decided on the walk from the kitchen to the front room that she would not soften it or edit it or present it in a way designed to manage his reaction. He deserved the full truth, and she was going to give it to him. She told him about Greer's offer, about what she'd said, about Finch and the letter to Hartwell in Cheyenne. When she finished, the silence lasted for a long time. "You sent a letter to Finch's supervisor," Nathan said. "Yes." "Without telling me?" "Yes." "Why?" She looked at him directly. "Because you would have said no," she said. "You would have said it wasn't my place, or it was too aggressive, or you didn't want to involve anyone else. And you would have been wrong, and I would have had to argue with you about it and convince you, and by then it might have been too late." He looked at her. His jaw was working slightly the way it did when he was processing something he had strong feelings about and was deciding which feelings to act on. "You made a decision about my ranch," he said. "I made a decision about a federal investigation that I am a named witness in," she said. "And about my property which sits on your western border and which Greer wants for strategic reasons that are directly tied to his campaign against you. My property is involved in this whether I act or not. I chose to act." Another silence. "You told him about Finch," Nathan said. "Yes." "That was a risk. If Greer moves to destroy evidence, then Finch moves faster," she said. "That's what I wanted. A forced acceleration. Greer is patient when he thinks he has time. I wanted him to know he doesn't have time." Nathan stood up, walked to the window, stood there. "What you did today," he said, talking to Greer directly, he could have done anything. "I know. You were alone." "I know that too." He turned around. "Abigail." Her name in his voice, and the way he said it, then tighter, rougher, something underneath it that was not anger at all, but was wearing anger's face. "You should have waited for me." She looked at him. "And if you'd been there, you would have thrown him off the property before he finished his offer," she said. "And I wouldn't have found out what he knows. I wouldn't have been able to tell him what I told him." The conversation had value precisely because he thought he was talking to someone manageable. "You let him underestimate you." "I have been letting people underestimate me my entire life," she said. "I know how to use it." He stared at her. She held his gaze. Something broke open in his expression. Then, not anger, not the complicated frustration of a man whose control of a situation had been usurped. Something larger and less comfortable than any of that. Something that looked as if she was honest with herself, which she was trying to be, like fear. Not of Greer, not of the investigation. Fear of what it meant that she had been alone in that yard, and he hadn't known, and anything could have happened. She understood the feeling. She understood it in her body before she understood it in her mind, and it arrived with a weight she had not been expecting. "Nothing happened," she said quietly. "This time," he said. "Yes," she said. "This time." He turned back to the window. They stood there for a while on either side of that sentence, and neither of them said what it meant, and neither of them had to. Hartwell's response arrived 9 days later. Not a letter. Hartwell himself, with 2 men from the land office and a territorial marshal named Briggs, who had a face like a cliff face, and the demeanor of someone who had run out of patience with corruption approximately 15 years ago and had been professionally useful ever since. Abigail heard the wagon from the kitchen and knew before she got to the door that something had shifted. Finch was with them. He gave her a nod that contained several things: recognition, gratitude, and the slight expression of a professional who had not anticipated the variable that had accelerated his own timeline, but was retroactively glad it had. She made coffee for 5. She brought it in, set it down, and turned to leave. "Miss Carter," Hartwell said. He was a compact man in his 60s, formal and precise. "Please stay. We'll need you for the statement portion." Nathan looked at her. She sat down. What came out of that meeting over the course of 3 hours was this: the Territorial Land Office had enough evidence to issue warrants. Not suggestions, not further inquiries, warrants. For Greer and for 2 associates in Cheyenne who had been facilitating the financial irregularities on the Morrison property purchase. Briggs would execute the warrants. The timeline was within the week. After Hartwell and his men left Finch lingering last, shaking Abigail's hand with the precise pressure of a man expressing more than a handshake, could technically contain, Nathan and Abigail sat in the front room as the light went golden and long. "It's almost over," she said. "It won't feel real until Briggs comes back," Nathan said. "No," she agreed. Silence. "What you wrote to Hartwell," he said. "I read it. He left a copy." She looked at him. "I hope that was all right," she said. "It was extraordinary," he said simply. She didn't know what to do with that, so she looked at her hands. "I want to ask you something," Nathan said. She waited. "When this is over," he said, "when Greer is gone, and the investigation is closed, and the cattle drive is done, what are you planning?" She considered the question. "Improve the Collins property," she said. "Extend the kitchen garden. Maybe add a second room." "And after that?" "I haven't thought past that." A pause. "Stay on here," he said. "At the ranch, longer term." She looked at him. "I'm already here," she said carefully. "I mean—" He stopped, started again. "I mean that I'd like you to stay. Not as the cook. Not as the ledger manager. I mean—" He stopped again. Nathan Walker, she had learned, was a man of very precise language, and when his language became imprecise, it was because he was in territory. He hadn't mapped yet and was navigating by instinct rather than knowledge. She had come to recognize this. She found it privately one of the most genuine things about him. "Nathan," she said. "I'm getting there," he said. "Take your time," she said, and meant it. He looked at her directly, then the way he did when he wanted to make sure something landed correctly. "I have not trusted a person with anything that mattered in a long time," he said. "And you have. In 4 months, you have had your hands in every part of what I've built. My ledger, my supply chain, my legal case, my men." He paused. "And I have not once had a reason to regret it." She held very still. "That's not a small thing," he said. "For me, that is not a small thing at all." The room was quiet. Outside, one of the horses shifted in the paddock. "I know," she said. It's not a small thing for me either." He nodded. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. Not yet. But he had said the true thing, the real thing, underneath all the practical things, and it sat between them in that room, the way the first foundation timber sits in new ground. Not the whole structure, but the thing everything else would eventually stand on. She went home that night to her own house, her own property, her own 40 acres with the deed filed and the well running clean and the porch solid under her feet. She sat outside for a while in the warm August dark. She thought about a man who had decided to trust her with everything that mattered. She thought about what she had built here from nothing, from a thin letter and $22 and 2 hands that knew how to work. She thought about what was still ahead, the warrants and the trial and the cattle drive and all of it. And underneath all of that thinking, steady and warm and deeply inconvenient. She thought about the way Nathan Walker said her name, like he had decided it meant something. She was already in trouble. She had known it for weeks. She went inside anyway. Briggs arrested Harlan Greer on a Tuesday morning, Abigail heard about it from Clem, who had been in town buying fence staples when the marshal's wagon came down Main Street, and who rode back to the ranch at a pace that suggested the news was either very good or very bad, and arrived breathless and grinning in the yard to report that Greer had come out of the mercantile with a paper bag of coffee beans in his hand, and Briggs had taken him so cleanly and quietly that half the street hadn't even noticed until the wagon was already gone. Coffee beans, Clem said, still delighted by this detail. He was buying coffee beans. Abigail was at the stove when Clem told her. She kept stirring, set the spoon down, picked it up again. "Anyone with him?" she said. "Just his nephew Bill." Bill didn't get arrested. He just stood there holding the door of the mercantile looking like someone had hit him with a plank. She nodded. "Thank you, Clem." He lingered. Aren't you glad?" She looked at him. "I'm very glad," she said. "I'm just also aware that an arrest is not a conviction, and Greer has money for lawyers, so we wait." Clem absorbed this. "Mr. Walker's going to want to know," he said. "Yes, go tell him." She listened to his boots cross the yard and thought about Greer with his coffee beans, and Briggs with his warrants, and Finch with his 14 months, and she felt something that wasn't quite relief. Relief was too simple, but was the thing that relief feels like when it's mixed with the knowledge that the fight isn't finished yet, and you can't afford to put your guard down just because the first good thing happened. She finished the stew. She kept working. Nathan came in from the barn at midday and stood in the kitchen doorway with dust on his shirt and something complicated on his face. "Briggs got him," he said. "I heard. Clean arrest, no trouble." "Good." He came into the kitchen and sat down at the work table, which he almost never did. Nathan Walker ate at the table with his men, or stood at the window, or worked through meals entirely. But sitting down in the kitchen in the middle of the day was not a thing he did, and she registered the departure from habit the way she registered most things quietly, completely. 15 years, he said. She set a cup of coffee in front of him. He wrapped both hands around it. "My father spent the last 4 years of his life fighting that man," Nathan said. "Lawyer fees. Lost contracts. He won every legal fight, but Greer made sure winning cost as much as losing, wore him down." He paused. "I always thought if I ever got the ranch clear of Greer, my father should be here to see it." She sat down across from him. She didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that wasn't smaller than what he'd just said. So she said nothing and let it sit there. And he drank his coffee, and the kitchen was quiet around them. After a while he said, "He would have liked you." "Your father?" "Yes." She looked at her hands. "Why?" she said. "Because you don't talk when there's nothing useful to say," Nathan said. He was the same way. Said silence was undervalued. He set the cup down. "And because you build things." He believed the only real measure of a person was what they built and what they protected. He would have looked at your house and your ledger and your 40 pages of documentation, and he would have thought you were exactly the right kind of person. She felt something move in her chest that she was not going to examine too closely in the middle of a workday. "He sounds like he was the right kind of person too," she said. "He was," Nathan said. Simply finally like a door closing on a room he still visited sometimes, but didn't live in anymore. He stood up. "The drive leaves in 3 weeks, he said. "I need the supply inventory updated." "I'll have it this afternoon," she said. He nodded and went back outside. She sat at the work table for another moment. Then she opened the ledger. The trouble with Greer's arrest, as Abigail had predicted to Clem, was that it was not the end. Greer made bail within 48 hours, a sum that was startling even by the standards of a wealthy man, which told her something about how seriously he was taking the charges and how many people in Cheyenne still owed him favors. He was back in his house by Thursday. He was not technically allowed to come within a mile of the Walker property per Briggs's conditions of release, but territory was wide, and conditions of release were only as good as the people enforcing them. And Greer, free and furious, and with his entire constructed world beginning to dismantle itself, turned his attention to the one target the release conditions hadn't specifically named. He came to Abigail's property on a Friday evening. Not alone. with Bill his nephew and a man she didn't recognize, older, heavy, the type of man who was there to add weight to a situation rather than to speak. She was on her porch when she saw them coming up the road. She did not go inside. She did not go for the rifle she kept behind the kitchen door, which she could shoot with reasonable accuracy and had never had to demonstrate. She stood up and put her hands in her apron pockets and waited. Greer stopped at the gate. "Miss Carter," he said. His voice was different than it had been before, still controlled, but the control was working harder now. The way a dam works harder when the water behind it is higher. "Mr. Greer," she said, "you might want to be careful about the terms of your release." "My property line is a mile east," he said. "This road is public." "It is," she agreed. "I want to have a conversation." "I don't believe we have anything left to discuss." "We have plenty to discuss." He dismounted. His two men stayed on their horses. "Your statement to Finch. I want to know exactly what you said." "You can get that from your lawyer through discovery. I want to hear it from you." "Then you'll be disappointed," she said. "Because I'm not going to tell you, and you standing on a public road cannot make me." His jaw tightened. "You don't understand what you've done," he said. "What you've put in motion. This goes beyond me and Walker. There are men in Cheyenne who are very unhappy right now, and those men have long memories, and, Mr. Greer," she said, "I want to ask you something." He stopped. "When you burned the feed barn," she said, "did you think I wouldn't have already made copies of every document I gave Finch? Did you think destroying the ranch would destroy the evidence? Because I want you to understand very clearly that the documentation exists in 3 places now. Finch has a copy. Hartwell's office in Cheyenne has a copy. And a copy is with an attorney in St. Louis that I mailed 6 weeks ago with instructions to forward it to the territorial governor's office if anything happens to me or to Nathan Walker or to this property." She watched him. She watched the exact moment the calculation changed in his eyes. She had not mailed anything to St. Louis. There was no attorney in St. Louis. But he didn't know that, and the possibility that she had been 6 moves ahead of him for longer than he had understood was visible in his face like a crack in a window pane. Small. Definitive. Going nowhere, but wider. "You're bluffing," he said. "Maybe," she said pleasantly. "Would you like to find out?" Bill on his horse shifted uncomfortably. The third man was looking at the middle distance in the way of someone who was being paid for presence and not for judgment, and was privately reconsidering the value of this particular engagement. Greer looked at her for a long time. "This isn't over," he said. "You'll want to speak to your lawyer before you make any more visits," she said. "Good evening, Mr. Greer." She went inside. She locked the door. She sat down on the kitchen floor for the second time in 2 months and breathed. Then she got up and wrote a very fast letter to Finch telling him that Greer had violated the spirit of his release conditions and suggesting that the physical conditions might need to be clarified, and she sent it by Clem first thing the next morning. By Monday, Greer's bail conditions had been amended to include a specific prohibition on approaching Abigail Carter or her property. She found that out from Susanna, who had found it out from the sheriff's deputy, who had been very forthcoming over a piece of apple cake. She made Susanna a fresh pie. The cattle drive preparation ate the next 2 weeks whole. She barely slept. She managed the resupply with what Nathan had on hand and what she could source from 3 different suppliers she had cultivated relationships with over the preceding months. Relationships built on timely payment, clear communication, and the occasional pie, which she had learned was a remarkably effective business tool in Laramie County. She updated the supply inventory daily. She cross-referenced the cattle count against the drive roster. She calculated feed requirements for 12 days on the trail and built in a 15% buffer for weather and unexpected delays. She reorganized the medical supplies, restocked what was depleted, and wrote out a clear reference document for whoever needed it on the trail. Because she was not going on the trail. Her job ended at the ranch boundary and the men would be out there alone with Nathan and Rourke, and 12 days of Wyoming between them and the market. The night before the drive left, she made a full supper. Not the ordinary working supper, but the real kind. The kind that said this, matters with roasted beef and fresh bread, and the apple cake that had become without anyone formally deciding it. The Walker Ranch's version of a celebration meal. The men were louder than usual. Clem got into a good-natured argument with Torres about the correct way to read a river crossing. Rourke told a story from his Morrison days that made even Gus laugh, which was rare enough that everyone noted it and nobody said anything about it. Nathan sat at the head of the table and ate and listened and said very little, which was how he always was, the still center around which the noise organized itself. She stayed in the kitchen mostly, and sent food out, and listened to them through the wall, and felt something she didn't have a clean word for. Not loneliness, she had been alone before, and knew what that felt like. Something closer to belonging, which was more complicated than loneliness, because it had further to fall. When the meal was done, and the men had drifted toward the bunkhouse, she was clearing the table when Nathan came back in. She had thought he'd gone to the barn. "You didn't eat," he said. She looked at him. "I ate in the kitchen." "You didn't sit down." "I rarely sit down during a meal service." He picked up a plate from the sideboard, put food on it, and set it on the table. "Sit down," he said. She sat down. He sat across from her and watched her eat, which should have been uncomfortable, and somehow wasn't, and after a moment he said, "I'm going to be gone 12 days. "I know. I wrote the supply manifest. The property will be quiet. I'm accustomed to quiet." He was quiet himself for a moment. "Greer's men will know the ranch is down to skeleton crew," he said. "I'm leaving Gus. Gus and I will manage. If anything happens, I'll handle it," she said. "And if I can't handle it, I'll get word to Briggs." He nodded. She ate. He watched the wall. "Nathan," she said. "Yes." "Come back." She hadn't meant to say it quite that plainly. The plainness of it surprised her even as she said it, no cushioning, no qualifier, no way to retreat into practicality. He looked at her. "I'm planning on it," he said. "I know. I'm saying it anyway." Something shifted in his face, the same thing she'd seen the night he told her about the woman who had wanted the ranch, and not him, the large, uncomfortable thing that didn't have a simple name. "Abigail," he said. "Yes. When I come back," he said, "I'd like to have a conversation, a real one. About what—" He stopped, navigated, started again. "About what happens next, for the ranch, for you, for—" He stopped again. She waited. "I'm not good at this," he said. "I know you're not," she said. "I'm not either. So maybe when you come back we can both be bad at it together and see what happens." Something broke through his expression then. Not quite a smile. Nathan Walker's face was not built for easy smiling, but the thing that lived in the same place. A smile does the warmth of it, the willingness. "That's a reasonable proposal," he said. "I thought so," she said. He left early the next morning before she arrived, which she had expected. But tied to the porch post where she hitched her horse was a folded piece of paper weighted with a stone. She unfolded it. It was a formal promissory note, handwritten for the $61 she had contributed after the fire and the wages she had lent, and the $48 advance he had given her. Every number precise, every term clear. At the bottom, in handwriting that was slightly different from the formal text above, less deliberate, more personal. He had written, "The ranch will be here when I get back. So will I." She folded the paper and put it in her apron pocket. She went inside and made breakfast for Gus. The 12 days were not quiet. She had not expected them to be, but the particular way they were not quiet surprised her. It started on day 3, when Susanna Pratt came to the Collins property. Her property, she still felt a small, fierce satisfaction every time she thought that, with the expression that mixed excitement and anxiety in roughly equal proportions. "There's something you should know," Susanna said. The something was this: Martha Caldwell. Miss Caldwell of the boarding house, the narrow woman with the sharp eyes who had told Abigail she needed the room back when no family was coming, had been talking. At the church women's group, at the dry goods counter, at the post office. Saying that Abigail Carter had installed herself on a property she had no right to, and had maneuvered herself into a position at the Walker Ranch that was not strictly professional, and that respectable women of the county ought to be paying attention. Abigail listened to all of this. "How many people is she reaching?" she asked. "Enough," Susanna said. "The church group is about 20 women, and Martha Caldwell has a gift for making things sound very reasonable." "Is Greer behind it?" Susanna hesitated. "Bill Greer's wife attends the same church group," she said. There it was. Abigail thought for a moment. "Susanna," she said, "how many of those 20 women have eaten something I baked?" Susanna blinked. "Well, all of them, I should think. The church social, and I've sold to several of them through the bakery. And how many of them have been to the property here?" "3 or 4 when you hosted the ladies' auxiliary meeting last month." "Good," Abigail said. "Then they have a basis for their own judgment." She stood up. "I'm going to the church group meeting on Thursday." Susanna stared at her. "You're going to just walk in. I was invited 3 weeks ago. I declined because I was managing the drive preparation. Now I have time." She untied her apron. "Would you come with me?" "Of course I'll come with you," Susanna said with the energy of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this invitation. The Thursday meeting was held in the church hall. 22 women arranged on chairs with handwork in their laps, and the comfortable social architecture of a group that had been meeting in this configuration long enough that everyone knew their place. Abigail walked in with Susanna and found 2 empty chairs and sat down. The room shifted. Not dramatically, these were women who had been trained since childhood to manage their reactions, but she felt it, the recalibration, the quick social assessments being made and updated. Martha Caldwell was at the front presiding. She saw Abigail, and her expression did an interesting and complicated series of things. "Miss Carter," she said, "we didn't expect you." "I was invited last month," Abigail said. "I hope it's all right that I came." "Of course," Martha Caldwell said. She said it in the tone of someone for whom it was very much not of course. The meeting proceeded. Handwork Committee reports discussion of the Autumn Church fundraiser. Abigail contributed to the fundraiser discussion with 2 specific and useful suggestions about the food committee that were received with the slightly startled appreciation of people who had been prepared for a problem and instead received a solution. Toward the end of the meeting, a woman named Agnes Whitehill, Bill Greer's wife, a quiet woman in her 40s who had the look of someone who spent a lot of time managing expectations, said carefully, "Miss Carter, how are you finding life on the Collins property? I understand it was quite ambitious of you to take it on." The room went slightly quieter. "It's been good work," Abigail said. "The house needed a great deal of attention when I arrived, but it's solid now. The well runs clean, the roof is sound, the kitchen garden is producing well." She paused, then looked at Agnes directly. "I bought it with my own earnings, $41 of wages and $62 from baking, which I did in 3 weeks to make up the difference between what I'd saved and the purchase price. Mr. Mercer filed the deed. It's recorded at the county office." Another pause. "I'd be glad to show anyone the property who'd like to see it." Agnes Whitehill looked at her. "That's very impressive," she said, and the complicated thing about it was that she seemed to mean it. Not the way people mean impressive when they're managing a situation. The way people mean it when someone has just told them something that genuinely reconfigured what they thought they understood. "It's just work," Abigail said. "It's all just work." Martha Caldwell said nothing for the rest of the meeting. Abigail helped stack chairs afterward and complimented Agnes Whitehill on her embroidery, which was genuinely excellent, and left with Susanna, who was practically vibrating. "That was masterful," Susanna said. "It was honest," Abigail said. "Those aren't always the same thing, but in this case they were." She walked home thinking about Agnes Whitehill's face when she heard the numbers. $41 of wages, $62 of baking. 3 weeks. Facts were not the same as reputation, and reputation was not the same as truth, and truth was not always enough to win. But sometimes it was. She would find out which kind of sometimes this was. Nathan came back on the evening of the 12th day. She knew he was back before she saw him because she heard Gus shout something in the yard, and then the particular sound of several horses coming in together, and she untied her apron and went to the door. He looked thinner. 12 days on the trail did that. He had a new cut above his left eyebrow, and his shirt had been mended at the shoulder with thread that wasn't quite the right color, and he was covered in the particular combination of dust and exhaustion that meant the drive had been hard and successful and everything in between. He saw her standing in the doorway, and he stopped walking. "You're here," he said. "I live 3 miles that way," she said. "But I wanted to be here when you got back." He stood there for a moment. He looked at her the way he sometimes looked at things he had built, and was checking for soundness present and precise and complete. "The drive went well," he said. "We got good price, better than last year." "I'm glad. River crossing on day 8 was rough. Clem handled it well." "I'll tell him you said so." He nodded. He still hadn't moved. "Nathan," she said, "you said you wanted to have a conversation when you got back." "I did say that." "You've been back for approximately 4 minutes." "I know." "You're allowed to wash the trail off first," she said. "I'll have food on the table in an hour." Something in him settled, not relaxed exactly, because Nathan Walker didn't relax in any conventional sense, but settled like a structure that has been checked for load and found sound. "An hour," he said. "An hour," she agreed. "I went to clean up." She went back to the kitchen. She was plating food when he came back, clean shirt, damp hair, the cut above his eyebrow cleaned and less angry looking, and sat down at the kitchen table. Not the dining table where the men ate. The kitchen table across from where she was working. She put food in front of him. She sat across from him. She ate, and he ate, and neither of them spoke for a while, and it was the same comfortable silence. It had always been the silence that felt like a room with good walls and not an absence. Then he said, "Tell me what happened while I was gone." She told him everything. Greer's amended bail conditions, the church group meeting, Susanna, Agnes Whitehill, and the chair stacking and the embroidery. Martha Caldwell's face. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet. "You went to the church group meeting alone," he said, "with Susanna. And you just walked in." "I was invited." He looked at her. "What are you going to do," he said, "when there isn't a crisis to solve?" The question surprised her. She sat with it for a moment. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've been managing one thing after another since June. I haven't had time to think past the current problem." "The current problem," he said, "is nearly finished. Greer's trial is still. Finch says the case is solid. Greer is going to take a deal or he's going to lose at trial, and either way, he's finished in this county." He set his fork down. "So what comes next for you, really?" She looked at her hands. "I want to expand the kitchen garden," she said. "I want to add chickens. I've been thinking about the baking. Whether there's a real business there, not just supplemental income. Susanna's oven isn't available every week, and a commercial arrangement would need reliable." "You're describing 10 years of work," he said. "Yes," she said. "Is that a problem?" "No," he said. "I'm just thinking about proximity." She looked at him. "The Collins property," he said carefully, "borders my western fence line." "I know," she said. "I documented it in the Abigail." She stopped. He looked at her directly. "I'm not talking about fence lines," he said. Her heart did something she was going to need a moment to recover from. "I know," she said. "I'm also not good at I don't have the language for this kind of—" He stopped. His jaw worked. "The woman I told you about, who wanted the ranch." "Yes. After she left, I decided I told myself that the ranch was enough. That I had built something real and it was enough and I didn't need—" He stopped again. "I was wrong about that," he said. "I knew I was wrong for a while. I just didn't have evidence that the other way was possible." She was very still. "And now," she said. He looked at her. "Now I have 4 months of evidence," he said. "That it's possible. That there's a person who I can—" He made a small, frustrated sound that was almost funny, and was also the most genuine thing she had ever heard from him. "I'm telling you that I don't want to be on one side of a fence line from you," he said. "I'm telling you that I would like you closer. That I would like more. Whatever that means, whatever that looks like, more." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside she could hear the men settling in the bunkhouse. A horse in the paddock. The vast Wyoming dark pressing warm against the windows. "I came here," she said slowly, "because a man sent me 14 letters and then canceled the arrangement because of what I looked like. I know. I have spent my whole life being told that what I look like changes what I'm worth, that there's a certain kind of life that's available to certain kinds of women, and I'm not that kind." She paused. "I stopped believing that somewhere around the second week on this property, when I got the roof sound and the well running and realized nobody's opinion had changed any of it. But," she stopped. "But," he said. "But I need you to understand what you're actually saying," she said. "Because I am not. I don't need to be handled carefully. I don't need to be managed. I'm not fragile. But I am particular about this. I need the thing to be real, or I need it to be nothing." "It's real," he said. "You've known me 4 months. I've known myself for 38 years, he said. "I know the difference between useful and necessary. I know when something has become—" He paused. "You have become necessary to me, Abigail. I don't say that lightly. I don't say anything lightly." She looked at him. She thought about Thomas Aldridge's thin letter, about Miss Caldwell's porch, about Dorothea's voice and the look, the particular apologetic dismissive look, and all the years of being categorized and assessed and found wanting. She thought about a man who had looked at her on a broken porch roof and said, "I see that," and meant it, and never once looked at her with the look. Not once. In 4 months, not once. "All right," she said. He looked at her. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. "We'll figure out what it looks like, together." He reached across the table. He put his hand over hers, large and rough and warm, the same hand that had shaken hers on the wage advance agreement, and meant something then, and meant considerably more now. He held it. She turned her hand over and held his back. Neither of them spoke. There wasn't anything to say that was bigger than what was already in that room, in that kitchen, in that moment. Two people who had built things alone for long enough to know exactly what they were choosing when they chose to stop. She let herself feel the full weight of it. She didn't look away. The word spread the way. Words always spread in a town like Laramie, not all at once, but in layers, each layer reaching a different stratum of the social order, until eventually it had covered everything. Nathan Walker was courting Abigail Carter. Not rumor this time. Not Greer's carefully constructed insinuation. Fact observable and plain. He rode to the Collins property on Sunday afternoons and stayed for supper. He walked with her from the ranch to the gate when she left in the evenings. He had been seen in Mercer's office for a second time asking questions that Mercer, to his credit, did not repeat, but that his clerk apparently did. Abigail knew the town was watching. She had always known the town was watching. The watching had just changed its character. It had shifted from the assessing, categorizing scrutiny. She had arrived to the "what is she and where does she fit?" She fit watching into something more complicated. Something that contained, depending on the watcher, varying proportions of surprise and approval and recalculation, and the particular human discomfort of having to revise a judgment you'd already committed to. She let them watch. She had nothing to hide and no energy to spend on managing other people's adjustments. She had a kitchen garden to winterize, a second room to frame out on the east side of the house, a baking arrangement to formalize with Susanna, and a man who came on Sunday afternoons and sat across from her at the kitchen table and talked. Actually talked in the halting, precise way of someone who had been quiet for so long that language had to be relearned for certain subjects, but learning it, genuinely learning it, one Sunday at a time. The first Sunday he told her about his parents. Not the abbreviated version she'd heard before his father worked hard and died. His mother made the best biscuits, but the real version. His mother had been from Tennessee, had come west at 18, and hated Wyoming for the first 3 years, and loved it ferociously for the next 30. His father had proposed to her 4 times before she said yes, because she wanted to be certain he was proposing to her and not to the idea of a wife. And when she was certain, she said yes and meant it for the rest of her life. 4 times, Abigail said. 4 times, Nathan confirmed. She knew what she was doing. She always knew what she was doing, he said. My father said she was the most competent person he had ever met, and he meant it as the highest possible compliment. She looked at him across the table. "He sounds like he knew what he had," she said. "He did," Nathan said. "He just didn't always know how to say it." "But he knew." "He knew," Nathan said. And the way he said it, the steadiness of it, the weight, she understood that he was not only talking about his father. She got up to refill the coffee. Her hands were steady. Her heart was doing something considerably less steady, but her hands were steady, and that was what mattered in the kitchen. Greer's trial date was set for the second week of October, and the week before it, Finch came to the ranch with news that rearranged everything. Greer was taking the deal. Not all of it his lawyers had negotiated, but the core of it, he would relinquish his Wyoming landholdings, pay restitution to Nathan Walker for documented losses, and accept a 5-year federal supervision arrangement that effectively ended his operation in the territory. "He'll be gone by November," Finch said. "Property liquidated associates charged separately. The Cheyenne connection is being handled by a different office." He was sitting across from Nathan in the front room. Abigail was in the doorway because nobody had told her to leave, and she was past the point of leaving rooms where important things were being said. Nathan said nothing for a moment. "The restitution figure," he said. Finch told him. It was more than she had expected. Considerably more. Enough to rebuild the feed barn, properly resupply for the next 2 seasons, and have money left over for the kind of deferred maintenance a ranch accumulated across 15 years of fighting a legal war while trying to run cattle at the same time. Nathan looked at his hands. "He burned that barn," he said. "We know he burned it." "We know," Finch said. "The restitution accounts for it." "That's not what I mean." Finch was quiet. "My father," Nathan said. "He spent 4 years fighting this man. He died without seeing it finished." He paused. "A deal means no trial. No public record of what Greer actually did." "The federal investigation record is public," Finch said carefully. "Anyone who wants to know what he did can find it." "That's not the same as a verdict." "No," Finch said. "It's not." The room was quiet. Abigail looked at Nathan's profile. The jaw working the particular stillness that meant something large was being held very carefully. She said, "Nathan." He looked at her. "Your father knew what Greer was," she said. "Every person in this county who watched your family fight him for 15 years knows what he was. The deal doesn't change what happened. It just ends it." She paused. "Sometimes ending it is the verdict." He held her gaze for a long time. Then he looked at Finch. "All right," he said. "The deal." Finch left an hour later with a signed agreement and the expression of a man who had spent 14 months on something and was finally carefully allowing himself to believe it was finished. When his wagon was gone, Nathan stood in the yard for a long time. She stood beside him. Neither of them spoke. After a while he said, "Thank you." "I didn't do anything just now." "You've been doing things since June," he said. "All of it. Every piece of it." He turned to look at her. "The 41 pages, the letter to Hartwell, Greer in your yard, the church meeting, all of it." He paused. "I didn't ask you to do any of it." "No," she said. "You didn't." "Why did you?" She looked at the eastern property line where Greer's land sat and would soon be someone else's, some ordinary person's just land, just acres, nothing charged or threatening. "Because it was right," she said. "Because you were fighting something true, and I had the tools to help, and not helping would have been a choice too, and I didn't like what that choice said about me." She paused. "And because this place—" She stopped, tried again. "Because I came here with nothing, and this is the first place that felt like it was mine. This whole valley. Not just my 40 acres. The whole valley felt like mine to defend." He looked at her. "It is yours," he said. She looked back at him. "I know," she said. And she did know it fully, and without apology for the first time in her life. "I know." The second Sunday after the deal was signed, he proposed. Not with the elaborate formality of the occasion she might have imagined in some younger, more fanciful version of herself. Nathan Walker was not an elaborate man. He proposed the way he did most things, directly, carefully, after having thought about it long enough to be certain, and then saying it plain. They were sitting on her porch in the October afternoon. The air gone sharp and clean, the way Wyoming air got in fall, and she was mending a tear in her work coat, and he was doing nothing, which she had noticed he allowed himself to do occasionally in her company, just sitting without a task, which for Nathan Walker was its own kind of statement. He said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about the valley feeling like yours." "Yes," she said without looking up from the mending. "I want you to have it," he said. "Formally, legally, as my wife." She stopped mending. She looked at him. He was looking back at her with the direct, steady gaze he used when he wanted to make absolutely sure something landed correctly. No deflection, no qualification, no performance. "You want to marry me," she said. "Yes." "Because of the valley." Something shifted in his face. The almost smile, the warmth behind it. "The valley was a clumsy opening," he said. "What I mean is, I want to marry you because you are the person I want to build the rest of this with. Because you are already in every part of what I'm building, and I would like that to be permanent. Because—" He stopped, navigated. "Because when I was on the trail for those 12 days, the thing I thought about most was getting back. Not to the ranch, to you." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about 4 times. His mother, who had made his father propose 4 times because she needed to be certain the proposal was for her. She was certain. She had been certain for a while. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "Yes, Nathan. I'll marry you." He reached over and took her hand the same way he had in the kitchen, large and warm and deliberate. And this time, he didn't let go. They sat on the porch together in the October afternoon, and neither of them said anything for a while, and it was the best silence she had ever sat inside of. The town's reaction arrived in layers just like everything else. Susanna Pratt was incandescent with joy and made her feelings comprehensively known at every social interaction for the following week, which covered considerable ground. Gus said when Nathan told the men at breakfast, "About time," and reached for a biscuit, and that was the full extent of his commentary, which was exactly right. Clem shook Nathan's hand and then looked at Abigail and said, "Ma'am, I'm real glad," with the earnest sincerity of a 19-year-old who had not yet learned to be less sincere, and she told him she was real glad too, and meant it completely. Rourke said nothing, but tipped his hat to her at every meal for a week, which she understood was his version of the same thing. Martha Caldwell sent a note of congratulations that was correctly worded and impeccably cool, and Abigail read it, appreciated the correctness of the wording, and put it in the fire. Agnes Whitehill came to the property on a Wednesday afternoon with a jar of preserves and said, "I owe you an apology, Miss Carter, for what was said at the church group before you joined us. I didn't say it, but I didn't stop it either, and that's not different enough." Abigail looked at her. "Come in," she said. "I'll put the kettle on." Agnes came in. They had tea. Agnes admired the kitchen garden through the window, and Abigail told her about the sweet potato preserves she'd been experimenting with, and by the end of an hour, they had agreed that Agnes's sister-in-law, who was a very capable seamstress with no reliable income since her husband's death, might be interested in the idea Abigail had been forming about a small cooperative arrangement between the baking business and some of the women in the county who had skills and no structure to sell them through. Agnes left with 2 jars of apple butter and a look on her face that said the apology had been only the first part of something. Abigail stood at the gate and watched her go, and thought about how the same county that had watched her arrive with a satchel and $22 was now not the same county. Or rather, the same people, but seen differently. Seeing her differently, the whole arrangement shifted by 6 months of observable fact. She had not changed to make that happen. She had just kept building. The wedding was in November, 3 weeks before the first snow. Small by the standards of a man with Nathan Walker's standing in the county, he could have filled the church twice over with people who would have come out of respect or curiosity, or both. But small was what they both wanted. The church, the pastor, Gus and Clem and Rourke and Torres and the other men. Susanna, who cried. Agnes Whitehill, who did not cry but came very close. Finch, who sent a letter because he was already back in Cheyenne, and who wrote that he had never expected when he opened a case file 14 months ago that it would end with something this good. She wore her best dress, which she had let out and re-hemmed herself because it had been made before she spent 6 months doing physical labor, and her shoulders had changed, and she had altered it so perfectly that Susanna said she couldn't see the seams, which Abigail took as the highest possible compliment. Nathan wore a suit she had never seen before. Dark wool precisely fitted, and she thought he must have had it made years ago for some occasion that hadn't required it until now. And she thought about the version of him that had bought that suit and expected to use it and then didn't, and she was glad in a specific and uncomplicated way to be the occasion. The pastor said the words. Nathan said, "I do," with the finality of a man who had thought very carefully before he spoke and would not be revisiting the question. She said, "I do," with the certainty she had carried since the porch, since the kitchen table, since the first Sunday afternoon, since the moment she had understood that he looked at her without the look, and never had. He put the ring on her finger. She looked at its simple gold plain band, and felt the weight of it as something solid and real and chosen. He squeezed her hand once. She squeezed back. The first morning after the wedding, she woke in the Walker Ranch house, her house now in the way that the county was her valley, and the 40 acres were her land. Everything here earned and chosen, and she lay still for a moment and listened. The ranch was already awake. She could hear it. Someone in the barn, a horse shifting the sound of the water pump, Gus's voice carrying across the yard in some instruction to Clem. Nathan was already up. She had expected that. He had been running this ranch before she arrived, and he would be running it in the morning regardless of what the calendar said, because that was who he was, and she had married who he was. She got up. She went to the kitchen and built a fire in the cook stove and started biscuits. He came in 20 minutes later with cold air on his coat and found her at the stove and stopped in the doorway. "You don't have to," he started. "I know I don't have to," she said. "I want to. Go wash up. It'll be ready in 15 minutes. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "There's something I need to show you. After breakfast." "All right." After breakfast, he took her out to the barn. Not the main barn, the new feed storage barn, rebuilt after the fire, solid pine and good construction. He opened the door. Along the east wall, built into the structure, was a room. Small, fitted with a desk and shelves and a window on the south side that let in the morning light. A ledger stand. A proper writing surface. She stood in the doorway and looked at it. "I had Rourke build it while we were dealing with the Finch situation," Nathan said from behind her. "I should have shown it to you sooner, but there was always something else happening and—" He paused. "It's your office. For the ledger work. For the baking business. For whatever you're building next." She stood very still. "You built me an office," she said. "In the barn, which isn't." "You built me an office," she said again. "If you don't like the location—" She turned around. He stopped talking. She crossed the space between them, and she hugged him. Not a cautious, careful hug, but a real one. Her arms around him, her face against his chest. The full weight of what she felt translated into physical fact, because she had spent a lifetime being precise with her feelings, and this was not a moment for precision. He stood still for about half a second. Then his arms came around her. Large and warm and deliberate, the same as every other gesture he made, and he held on. "Thank you," she said into his coat. He said, "It's just a room." "It's not just a room," she said. "No," he said after a moment. "I suppose it's not." December came, and with it, the first real snow, and with the snow came a letter from Dorothea. She had not written to Missouri since she arrived in Wyoming. Had not told anyone there about the property, the job, the case, the wedding. Had sent no correspondence because she had nothing she owed to the people she had left behind, and the energy required to explain herself had always seemed better spent on the work in front of her. But Dorothea had found out through what chain of information Abigail could not entirely reconstruct, but small worlds communicated in mysterious ways. And the letter that arrived was 3 pages long and covered in detail the following subjects: how surprised everyone was, how lovely it sounded, how they had always believed in Abigail, of course how the family was doing, how Dorothea herself was doing, and whether Abigail might come back to visit someday, so everyone could see how well she had done. She read it twice. She set it on the desk in her office in the barn in the south morning light, and she sat with it. She thought about the woman who had read Thomas Aldrich's thin letter in the Missouri post office and stood on the wooden sidewalk and decided not to go back. She thought about $22 and a leather satchel and no one waiting. She thought about Dorothea's voice at the funeral reception, the sympathy coating the poison pill. "Who is ever going to want all of you?" She picked up her pen. She wrote back. Not a long letter. A short one, correct and kind, because Dorothea was family and cruelty required more energy than she had to spare, and the best revenge her father had told her once was a life so full you didn't have room to think about what anyone had said about your chances. She wrote that she was well, that Wyoming suited her, that she had married Nathan Walker of Walker Ranch in Laramie County, that she had property of her own and a business she was building and work she was proud of, that she hoped Dorothea was well, that she hoped all of them were well. She did not write, "You were wrong about me." She didn't need to. The letter said it in every line. She sealed it. She set it aside to post the next time she went to town. She opened the ledger and started on the December accounts. The cooperative idea she had discussed with Agnes Whitehill came together in January with the speed of something whose time had arrived. Agnes's sister-in-law, whose name was Clara, and who was formidably capable and had been looking for exactly this kind of structure, brought two other women. One was a widow with a vegetable operation larger than she could manage alone. One was a younger woman, barely 20, with exceptional skill in preservation and bottling, and a family situation that made reliable independent income urgent. They met at Abigail's office in the barn. Her office, she still felt the particular satisfaction of those two words on a Thursday afternoon, with snow on the ground outside, and the cook stove going, and coffee on, and Abigail laid out what she had been thinking. A shared arrangement. Collective purchasing power for supplies. Shared access to commercial kitchen equipment through an agreement with Susanna. A unified pricing structure so they weren't undercutting each other. A single point of contact for the hotel and the boarding houses and the restaurants that needed reliable supply. Clara looked at the structure on paper. "You've done this before," she said. "I've managed supply ledgers," Abigail said. "The principle is the same. Where did you learn accounting?" "From my father, and from running a ranch operation for 6 months and finding out how much faster things fall apart without accurate numbers." Clara looked at the other women, looked at Abigail. "I'm in," she said. The others said yes. She wrote it all down that evening and showed Nathan the framework at supper. He read it carefully, turned a page, read it again. "This is a business," he said. "Yes. A real one, not supplemental income." "No," she said, "not supplemental, primary." He set the papers down. "How much capital do you need to start it properly?" "Less than you'd think. The infrastructure is mostly already there. What I need is—" She paused. "I need a cart, for delivery, and I need to be able to use the barn kitchen on days when your men don't need it for ranch operations." He looked at her. "The barn kitchen is yours," he said. "You built half of it, you run all of it." "I want it formalized," she said. "In writing. So it's not just your generosity, so it's mine." He looked at her for a long moment. This was the thing he had been learning these months slowly and without complaint, that she needed things to be hers in ways that were documented and certain. Not because she didn't trust him. Because she had arrived in Wyoming with nothing, and having nothing had taught her that mine only meant something when it was written down. "Draw up whatever you need," he said. "I'll sign it." She nodded. "And the cart," she said. "In the barn. Take the bay mare on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'll pay the feed costs." "Abigail." "I'll pay the feed costs," she said pleasantly. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Fine," he said. She added the feed cost calculation to the business framework. He watched her write and said nothing. But the almost smile was there, and she saw it, and she let herself feel the warmth of it without making anything of it. Just let it be what it was. A man watching a woman he loved, doing exactly what she was built to do, and being glad about it. The spring came slowly, the way Wyoming springs did, grudgingly, as if the winter were reluctant to admit the argument was over. And with the spring came the last thing she had not expected. A woman appeared at the ranch gate on a Tuesday morning in April. Not from Laramie, from out of town, well-dressed, traveling alone, which was unusual enough to be notable. She asked for Miss Carter. Abigail came to the gate. The woman was perhaps 40, handsome, with the particular self-possession of someone who had made decisions and lived with them. "Miss Carter," she said, then corrected herself. "Mrs. Walker." "Yes," Abigail said. "My name is Helen Aldridge," the woman said. "Thomas Aldridge was my brother." The name landed like a stone in still water. Abigail looked at her. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Aldridge?" she said. Helen looked at the ranch house, at the kitchen garden just greening at the edges, at the office window visible through the barn door. "My brother told me what he did," she said. "When he canceled the arrangement with you, he told me the whole of it." She paused. "He's not a bad man, he's a foolish one, but he was ashamed of it, and he told me, and I've been thinking about what I would say to you for 6 months. Another pause. "I don't know if an apology from his sister means anything." Abigail considered this. "Why did you come?" she said. "Because I wanted to see that you were all right." Helen said. "Because I have a brother who did a cruel thing to someone who didn't deserve it, and I wanted to know it hadn't." She stopped. "That it hadn't broken something that deserved to be whole." The silence between them held for a moment. Abigail looked at this woman who had traveled from wherever she had traveled from to stand at a gate in Wyoming and say a thing that cost her something. "Come in," Abigail said. "I'll put the kettle on." Helen Aldridge sat at the kitchen table and drank tea and looked at the room around her, at the organized shelves, the production notes pinned neatly on the wall, the ledger open on the desk, the warmth and the order and the life that was ongoing and busy and real. "You built all of this," Helen said. "Yes," Abigail said. After Abigail said. "Yes." Helen was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad," she said. "I'm truly glad." "So am I," Abigail said. She meant it in every direction it could be meant. She was glad for the house and the ranch and the business and Nathan and the valley and the women in the cooperative and the office in the barn and the bay mare on Tuesdays and Thursdays and the Sunday afternoons and all of it that had grown from $22 and a thin letter and the decision to keep driving west. She was glad she had come. She was glad she had stayed. She was glad she had not let a single one of them make her smaller. Not Aldridge, not Caldwell, not Dorothea, not Greer, not any of the looks, not any of the words, not any of the long nights on the porch, when the weight of everything she carried alone had pressed in close, and she had breathed through it and gotten up and made biscuits in the morning. She was glad. Nathan found her that evening, sitting in her office after the day's work was done, the lamp burning, the ledger closed for once, her hands still in her lap. He stopped in the doorway. "You all right?" he said. "Yes," she said. "I had an unusual visitor today." She told him about Helen Aldridge. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "What did you feel," he said, "when she said who she was?" She considered the question. "Surprised," she said. "And then I don't know. The word I keep coming back to is finished. Like the last thing that needed closing got closed." He came into the office and sat down across from her, the same way he sat across from her everywhere, with the quality of someone who had chosen to be exactly where he was. "Is there anything left," he said, "that you're carrying?" She looked at him. She thought about it honestly, the way she tried to do everything all the way without cushioning. "No," she said. "I don't think there is." He nodded. "Good," he said. She looked at the lamp, at the ledger, at the shelves of organized documentation that represented 6 months of work and one complete life built from scratch. "Nathan," she said. "Yes." "I want to tell you something." "Tell me." "When I came here," she said, "I was looking for a life that was large enough to hold me. Not, I don't mean in terms of—" She stopped, found the right words. "I mean a life where everything I am fit, where I didn't have to make myself smaller or quieter or less, where what I could do was what was needed." She paused. "I found it. I found it here, and it's larger than I imagined, and it keeps getting larger, and I don't know where the edge of it is, and that," her voice was steady, "that is the best thing anyone has ever given me." He looked at her. "You built it," he said. "I was just here." "You let me build it," she said. "That's not nothing. For a lot of people, that would have been everything they couldn't do." He was quiet. "You let me in," he said. "Into all of it. The ledger, the case, the all of it. That's not nothing either." "No," she said. "It's not." They sat there in the lamplight in the office in the barn of the Walker Ranch in Laramie County, Wyoming, in the spring of 1885. And outside, the world was doing the slow and patient work of becoming green again after a long cold, and inside, the work they had built together was ongoing and real and documented in 41 pages, and a cooperative framework, and a deed filed at the county office, and a gold ring, and a bay mare on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and every Sunday afternoon. He reached across the desk and took her hand. "Come home," he said. "Supper's getting cold." "This is my home," she said. "The kitchen is warmer," he said. She laughed a real laugh, the kind she had not had occasion for in longer than she could name before Wyoming. Before all of it. And he looked at her when she laughed with the expression of a man encountering something he had not known he was missing until it arrived. She stood up. She blew out the lamp. She took his hand, and they walked out of the barn, and across the yard, and into the kitchen, and the light was on, and the stove was warm, and supper was on the table, and outside, the Wyoming sky was enormous and dark and full of every star there was. Abigail Carter. Abigail Walker set her husband's plate in front of him and sat across from him at her kitchen table in her home and ate her supper. The woman nobody had wanted had built herself a life so full, there was no longer any room in it for what anyone had thought about her chances. She had never needed them to want her. She had only ever needed herself to believe she was worth building for. And she had. And she did. And every single day of it was hers.